Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me clearly. So welcome onto this training from Pearson and Excel. And this afternoon, we will be focusing on phonics. Before I start, may I ask you to download the documents because we're going to need the booklets in your materials during this session. So I'm going to give you a few moments to download the materials, please. It's either in the chat box that you've just received. So I'm just going to put hello there, just in case you don't know where the chat box is. It's there, or it's also on your screen. There's a resource tab where you could just download the materials that you need. Okay, so just give you a few moments there. So in the group chat, there is a link where you could download. Okay, so whilst we download, I just want to go through a few things. So I've sorry, as you have just heard, you can communicate with me through this chat. Everything that you type in here can be seen by everyone. If you want to send a particular question, but you don't want anyone to see, you can send that in the Q&A. So the Q&A is also on your screen. I will try to look at the Q&A regularly during this session. So if you send questions, you may have to be patient at times until I look at them. Okay, so on behalf of Pearson, so welcome. So we're going to be together for the next hour and a half, I would think, and we are going to focus on phonics. So let's have a look at the course of today. So today we're going to explore some challenges for the new Read Aloud and Dictation. So today we're going to look at phonics, but we're going to tie that in with the Read Aloud and Dictation tasks and see how we can address those two new elements of the specification into our teaching. And we're going to look at a range of strategies to teach phonics. So we're going to use examples in French, German, and Spanish. But as you can imagine, all the strategies can be used whatever the language you are doing. Okay, so the objectives of today is understand the common challenges in the Read Aloud and Dictation in the new GCSE. So starting this September with the new examination, with the new examination in 2026. We're going to look how we can introduce phonics naturally in our teaching, not just like something else we've got to do, but how we can tie that in with things we already do. And we're going to explore a range of activities to integrate phonics in teaching and learning. And then we're going to look at ways and for us to think about what are next steps for phonics in our lessons. So before I carry on, I've got a few questions I'd like to ask you. So I'm going to put some questions on the screen for you, and it would be lovely for you to answer. So here you have, so which language are you delivering? So just put your main one. And are you currently delivering our qualification? So which is the Pearson and Excel. Okay, thank you. I think we're nearly there. We've got 75% of our responses. So yeah, we've got mainly French and Spanish. We've got some German, and all of you this evening who have responded are teaching this qualification. Okay, thank you. I'm going to share the results with you. Okay, so you can see. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, thank you. So if so make sure you download the materials now, because when we finish the session, if there's anything that you haven't downloaded, everything will be disabled when we finish this session. So make sure you download everything now. And as I said earlier, we're going to need the booklet at some point during this event. Okay, so the agenda. So we're going to look at the overview for the Read Aloud task, look at the common SSC's errors in speaking. We're going to listen to an exemplar in French, one in German, one in Spanish. Then we're going to look at the dictation task. Again, we're going to look at some challenges with that task. And then we're going to look at 3 exemplars, French, German, Spanish. And then we're going to focus on classroom activities. And then we're going to finish with some support. And if you've got any other questions. So at any point, you can ask your questions. As I said, if you type in a group chat, hopefully I'll be able to see them. If it's something particular that you really want to ask, you might want to send that in a Q&A. Okay. So let's have a look. So let's have a look at the Read Aloud. So as you know, the Read Aloud is one of the new elements of the new GCSE. Now, if you have attended some of our Get Ready to Teach events, you may have already seen something similar to this. I just want to go over the overview of the Read Aloud. So as you know, there's going to be a card per context, and this Read Aloud is going to be the first thing that they complete in their speaking assessment. Okay, so in the speaking assessment, the Read Aloud will be the first task that they will have to do. There will be 8 marks for the Read Aloud, and then there will be 4 marks for the 2 questions that follow after that. So as you can see on the right-hand side, you have an example of a Read Aloud. And then under that, but the students will not see that, the candidate under there won't see the questions. These will be asked by the teacher. So what they will have on the card, they will have the Read Aloud that you can see here. So they would have time to practice that, and then they will have to read this aloud. And then once they have read this, then you would ask them 2 questions. Okay, so that's So there are differences by tier, whether they're doing foundation and higher. So at foundation, the word count will be between 35 and 40, and at higher will be 50 to 55. So obviously you can see a bit longer at higher. The sentences, they will be 4 at higher, but they will be longer and more complex in grammar. At foundation, there will be 5 sentences. The structures will be a little bit more complex at higher, and they will include grammatical aspects from the specification at higher. For example, here, you've got an example of a higher tier French. Il y a trop de gens qui viennent ici, et je pense que. So you can see here, you've got clauses. The mark schemes, as I said, it's out of 8. So the top mark, 7 to 8 for foundation, maps onto the 3 to 4 for the higher. In the Read Aloud, the candidates may come across some proper nouns. Now, if the proper nouns are in the vocab list, the students will be expected to pronounce them properly. For example, here, if we look at the French one, Paris and France are in the vocabulary, so therefore that will be counted towards their pronunciation. Whereas in the second one, you can see Stormzy. Stormzy is not in the list, but that here it was needed to make a coherent text. But when there is a noun, a proper noun that is not going to be assessed, there will be a little asterisk there telling them you will not be assessed on the pronunciation. So they could just say it, in English. They don't need to make it French. They just have to just say it. J'adore Stormzy. Okay, not Stormzy. Okay, so they just say it as they wish because they're not going to be assessed on that. So there will be clear indication on that. So what we're going to do, we're going to look at, we're going to listen to two exemplars of two read alouds. So in your booklets, what I'd like you to do is to look at the two read alouds, foundation and higher for your language. And I ask you to think which words or sound you think the students will find challenging. So I'm going to give you a few moments in your booklets. So if you've just arrived, if you've just joined us, the booklets are in the materials that you can download. You can find the materials on the bottom of your screen, or if you look in the group chat, there is also a link there. So you can download that. So I'm going to give you a few moments. So I'm going to ask you to look at the two read alouds, foundation and higher for your language, and have a little think about the words or sounds you think in those read alouds that the students will find challenging. So I'll give you a few moments. So in the group chat, you might want to, just put French, H, French higher, which words or sound, or Spanish foundation, which sounds you think they may stumble or they may find challenging to say, or currently where you think your students find challenging. So if you were to give the read alouds now to your students, which words or sounds do you think they will find challenging to say? So in the group chat, be nice to have your thoughts on that. Again, the materials are at the bottom of your screen. You've got to download them, or they're in the group chat, right at the top of the group chat. So you need to scroll back up. If you've got any issues, maybe in the Q&A, you could send us a message saying, I don't know where the materials are, so therefore Antoinette can help you with that. Okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ella. Thank you for your thoughts there. I can see a lot of you have been able to find the booklets. If you've got issues downloading, it's best if you send to Q&A so that Antoinette can help you, and then we could have a log of his finding it. Okay, should be the first few pages in the booklets, is the read alouds in the booklets there. So I'll give you a few moments just to read them and ask yourself. So again, Antoinette just put the materials there, the link, if you can't see them on your screen. Thank you, Morgane. Yeah, the cognates, yeah, we'll think about that later. Thank you. I've just seen something about having a speech impediment or something like this. As somebody said, I think if you thought that could impact on their performance, maybe you should raise a case of special consideration with your exam officer. So there's something that you need to have, to obviously depends on the impediment and the impairment. So you may, I say, have a chat with your exam officer about that. Okay, give you a few moments. Thank you. Okay, thank you. So now what we're going to do, so hopefully everybody's had access, you can see which ones they are. Thank you. There's a lot there, thank you. Okay, so what we're going to do now, we're going to listen to 3 foundation exemplars. Okay, so it's just obviously thinking of the time and what languages that we have. We're just going to concentrate on the foundation one. So I'm going to play each one. Okay, so I do apologize if, let's say, you don't do Spanish or you don't do German, but hopefully, if you look at the read aloud, you'll be able to follow. So we're going to start with the French one, then we'll do the Spanish, and then we'll do the French, German, and Spanish. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to listen, and if it's your language, maybe try to write down the words that you think they've pronounced not the way it should be pronounced, and whether the ones that you were expecting. So we are looking at the 3 foundation exemplars in your booklets. Okay, so as I said, if you've got the booklets in front of you, is the foundation ones. Okay, so let's listen. So I'm going to play it. They're very short. Okay, so I'm going to play them twice, each one. And as I said, try to write down, the words that they find challenging, and then maybe tick the ones that you thought would be a challenge. Okay, so let's listen to the French one.
J'aime bien mon collège. Il est très grand et moderne. J'ai beaucoup de travail tous les jours. Mes leçons de maths sont intéressantes et utiles. J'adore le français, mais les sciences sont un peu difficiles.
Okay, so that was the first listening. I hope you were able to hear this. Sorry, I'm going to play it again. Okay, so that was a French one. So as I said, the French foundation. Okay, so let's listen to the French foundation again.
J'aime bien mon collège. Il est très grand et moderne. J'ai beaucoup de travail tous les jours. Mes leçons de maths sont intéressantes et utiles. J'adore le français, mais les sciences sont un peu difficiles.
Okay, thank you. So write down the words that you heard, or the sounds that, it could just be generic, could be like final something, or it could be particular letters. Okay, now we're going to listen to the German, I think.
Ich wohne in Berlin. Das ist eine Großstadt. Ich mag die modernen Geschäfte im Zentrum. Hier kann man mit Freunden sehr gut einkaufen. Das mache ich gern am Samstag in der Nähe vom Bahnhof.
So I'm going to play it again. So that's the German one.
Ich wohne in Berlin. Das ist eine Großstadt. Ich mag die modernen Geschäfte im Zentrum. Hier kann man mit Freunden sehr gut einkaufen. Das mache ich gern am Samstag in der Nähe vom Bahnhof.
Okay, and then we're going to listen to the Spanish one.
Soy fan de internet. Me gusta estar en línea. Prefiero escuchar la música con mi móvil. Uso mi ordenador para aprender lenguas nuevas. También es fácil chatear con mis amigos españoles por las redes sociales.
Okay, so play that again.
Soy fan de internet. Me gusta estar en línea. Prefiero escuchar la música con mi móvil. Uso mi ordenador para aprender lenguas nuevas. También es fácil chatear con mis amigos españoles por las redes sociales.
Okay, so hopefully you were able to note down some words or sounds. So and ask us, we need to ask ourselves where these the sounds that we were expecting. So in the group chat, if you could just yeah, so we've got collège, yeah, the final consonant for French, yeah, in German the endings, the umlaut, yeah. French final consonant, yeah, the bien and beaucoup and grand and sont and travail, so all these in Spanish, yeah, accented vowels in Spanish, yeah. Okay, so obviously here we could start seeing some pattern of sounds are mispronounced. Silent letters, yeah, the I. Okay, in Spanish you've got the ordenador. Okay, música. Okay, so obviously here we can see a pattern of some key sounds, and obviously this is what as teachers we need to help our students with. First of all is to identify what we think, what our students, because probably different students will make probably different mistakes. For example, at my school, because we teach Italian as well, so we do French and Italian, all the C's in French become ch, and all the E silent becomes e. Okay, so the facile become facile. Okay, so there's something here that in French we've got to reinforce all the time. Like remember, your E is not like in Italian, you don't pronounce your E, your C is not a ch, but it's a C. So again, here, depending on what combinations of language or what your students have been exposed to, there are going to be different sounds that are going to be probably a challenge. And apart from those sound, there will be the others that we know are always an issue. For example, in French is the final letters, or in Spanish it could be the accent. In German it could be the umlaut. Okay, so something here that we've got to identify and ask ourselves, okay, what do we do? How do we help our students with those sounds? Okay, so here in French we had the sound. Some of you did mention these. So here we have the collage instead of the collège, but that's a common. And obviously you've got the final with the P and the sont, and then you've got the nasal with the int. In Spanish, you've got here the ending particular sound. In German, you've got the umlaut, the CH sound, the Stadt, and so on. So here is just making sure that, we do a tally of what are the sounds and making sure we focus on the ones that are a challenge and triggering. Okay, so now we're going. So we're going to look later at some activities we can do with that. So if first of all we look at the exam and then pull out the key challenges, and then we're going to put that into practice later on. So the other new aspect of this GCSE is the obviously, I said is the read aloud, but there's something that they also can do that is they can annotate. So remember, on the card that they will get, they can annotate the read aloud. Okay, so for example, here you could see that there's something here we could ask our students, we could help them, we could train them to annotate particular sounds. For example, here in French, the moi, they could write it the way they would say it. They could cross out all the letters they're not going to pronounce. They could underline all the kind of nasal sounds, for instance. They could circle particular sound like the E in regarder, and so on. So what I'd like you just to share with us is what would you expect your students to write or indicate when they annotate the read aloud task? What advice are you giving them? Because obviously we're starting, obviously some of you may have started a while back, maybe you started in year 8. So what do you tell your students to do? Do you tell them to put a dot, a star, to cross, to write phonetically? So it'd be nice for you to share what kind of practice you do with them. So I give you a few moments in the group chat. What do you tell them? Or maybe in Spanish, for this, I do this, or for German, I do that. So it'd be nice for you to share with us. Give you a few moments to type in. Thank you. For the French. Yeah, well, that's a good code, the dual there. Okay, so you ditch, you underline, you emphasize, and you link. I'm sure some of our colleagues this evening can use that. Any other techniques? Yes, circle, cognates, yeah. To avoid, so maybe to recognize the cognates and say, careful, this is a cognate. I'm not going to say chocolate, but I'm going to say chocolat. Okay, any other things that people share with their students? Yep. If you have an agreed spelling of how it sounds, for example, the I in French is a double E, so you could say everything you say I is a double E, or whatever or the IE and the EI in German. Yeah, the QU is a K. Okay, thank you. Okay, lovely, thank you. So if you're still tapping in, that's fine. I'm sure colleagues are grateful for the advice there. Thank you. So as I said, here you've got an example, something that could be done. Okay, so yeah. So here, if we were to do this one in Spanish, we could think, what can we ask our students to do? So Spanish teachers, what would you ask your students to do in this one? Just a few, if you are teaching Spanish, what would you say to your students? Or how would you help your students with these ones? Which words do you think would, so if you're teaching Spanish, it'd be nice to hear from you. What would you say here? Yeah, thank you. Okay, so something, as I said, something that we need to practice with them. Yeah, the TH, thank you, Pilar. Yeah, so yeah, split into syllables. Yeah, that could be useful. So that could be a good like starter activity, or at the end of the lesson, you say, okay, now here is or maybe for homework, we could ask them to homework, so annotate what you would say. Okay, so that could be, so we could give them a read aloud, or we could just give them a few sentences, and then we ask them to annotate. So that is then they've got to think, and then they have to explain why I underline. So once we've agreed on symbols or codes, then we say to them, okay, now here is a read aloud, let's annotate. Okay. Yes, the read aloud will be accepting different variation as long as it's consistent and as long as it is somewhere correct. Okay, so yes, we're not expecting just a one particular accent, because there are different accents and we're aware of that. But as long as it's consistent, and I know that it is a recognized accent, then it's fine. Okay, so as I say here, one activity that we could do. Okay, good. So So it's something, as I said, you could do as a department. You could agree, if you haven't done so yet, we could agree on codes for the annotation, because remember, in the prep room, they will be allowed only for the read aloud to annotate. Okay, obviously currently, if you are teaching the current the kind of the legacy GCSE, they're not allowed to write on the role play or on the picture card. But for the new GCSE, because we felt that it was important for them to be able to annotate, that could help them, therefore they'll be allowed to do so. There's something that we must not ignore, and then give time in lessons. Say, well, in your prep time, you will be allowed to annotate. So let's see how you can make the most of this of this possibility, because it's something that they need to be. I mean, if they decide not to do it, obviously there's nothing we can do, but I think the more we help them with that, the more they will get into it, and hopefully they will do it on the day. Okay, so something here just to bear in mind. Okay, so we've done the read aloud, so we've listened to exemplars, we kind of reviewed the expectation, we've identified some key sounds that we're going to look at later in the strategies, and we've concentrated on the annotation. Now what we're going to do, we're going to look at the dictation, which is another new aspect of this specification, where they have to listen, and they're going to hear words and sentences, and they will have to fill in gaps or write out full sentences. So the dictation is at the end of the listening task. That would be section B, and each sentence will be said 3 times. So remember, that's a new aspect of this specification. In listening, they will hear 3 times. Okay, so something new there. At foundation, they will have fill in the gaps and sentences to write out. It will be similar at higher, but there will be some differences. The fill in the gaps, there will be 6 words at foundation. So you could see here, sentences 1, 2, and 3, there are 6 gaps. So one word, a word is a word. For example, let's say L apostrophe could be a word, okay? J apostrophe is also a word. So a word is anything in the list that is an entry, okay? So anything in the list is considered as a word. So most of the words, I'm saying most because there are 2 exceptions for foundation. Most of the words are going to be taken out from the list. So all the words that they're going to hear, they will have seen them, they would have covered them in the vocab list. Okay, so they're not going to be unknown to them unless they've never been exposed to them, or they've never been taught, or they've never been given to them. There are only 2 words that are going to be outside of the vocab list. Okay, and that was one of the requirements that we had to fulfill. So in sentences 2 and 3, there are going to be 2 words. So 1 word in sentence 2 and 1 word in sentence 3 will be outside of the vocab list. So in sentence 1, the 2 words are known words. In the second sentence, the first or the second, obviously it depends on the coherence of the sentence, will be outside. And then in the third one, it will be 1 as well. Okay, so something you can prepare them for. Just say, well, in the first sentence, you'll know these 2 words. You would have seen them in your course. In the second one, there will be 1 word. Now, it may be that the word that is chosen, you may, as a teacher, you may have taught it, okay? Because obviously we've got the vocab list, and this is how the assessment is going to be based on. But as a teacher, you might have given them other words, or the students might have come across other words, okay? But the list there, to make it accessible to everyone, as I said, out of the 20 words, 18 would be from the vocab list, and there are 2 that are not going to be from the vocab list. Okay, and then in sentences 4, 5, 6, all the words will be known. Okay. And as you can see here, at foundation, we've got 20 words. So 6 words in the gap fill. So therefore, that gives us 14 words left for the 3 sentences. So you can see the sentences are not going to be very long. For 14 words to write 3 sentences. So, you're thinking, 4, kind of 3 words or 4, 5, depending. So you could have 5, 5, 4 or 6, 4, 4. So it's like 14 words for the sentences. So they are short sentences. Okay. Higher, you can see very similar, okay, in the layout, but there are a few differences. First of all, there's only 2 sentences with gaps, still 6 words, but out of 2 sentences. But then there will be 3 words out of the 6 outside the vocab list. So there will be 1 in sentence 1, and there will be 2 in sentence 2. So something to remember. 1 word in sentence 1, 2 words in sentence 2. Again, it doesn't, where they are, that's going to be the sentence coherence, but they know that. So in sentences 1 and 2, 3 words outside. Sentence 1, there will be 1. Sentence 2, there will be 2. So therefore, they've got to really listen. So if there's a word they don't recognize, they don't need to panic. They've got to say, okay, I know that there's going to be one I've never seen. So I'm going to apply here, read, I'm going to apply my knowledge of the sounds. And then in 3, 4, 5, 6 sentences, okay, full sentences. At higher, there are 30 words altogether. So we have 6 words in 1 and 2. So we've got 24 words remaining for sentences 3, 4, 5, and 6. So therefore, 24 words out of 6, out of 4 sentences. So you're looking at 6 words, 7 words for a sentence there. Okay. So but everything I've just said is there explained. And if you've been to Get Ready to Teach, you might have already heard that, but I just wanted to remind you of all this. So the mark scheme is we've tried to be compassionate wherever we could in the specification. We have tried to be compassionate. So here we have, I'm going to go over that in a moment, but we've tried to acknowledge the fact that in French especially, some sound can be rendered in different ways. And also we've tried to accommodate the fact that in some languages, some sounds may be more or less tricky to understand. For example, in German, you can hear most of the verb endings, okay, in Spanish as well as in French. As you know, a lot of letters are silent, okay. In German, most of the sounds, if you say a particular sound, there will be, most of the time, there will be one way of spelling that sound, okay. There are exceptions, obviously, but in French, if I say un, there will be different ways I can write un. Okay, so in Spanish, a sound usually is one particular spelling. So we've tried to be compassionate towards that, and we've tried to take that into account. But obviously, we had to have a limit of what we could accept, because otherwise we don't want a dictation to be just written phonetically. Okay, so we are going to reward words according to the types of mistakes that are made. For example, if a word is grammatically inaccurate, but still sound the same, especially if there's a missing silent letter, therefore we can still accept that. For example, if I write de maison without the S, I still say maison, okay, but obviously my S is missing. The S here is a grammar mistake. So therefore, there's no impact on pronunciation, and I can still recognize it. It's a grammar mistake. So therefore, I'm going to reward that word. Now, the way that you can assess whether you give a mark or not is to have two tests, okay? The first test is the sound. Does it sound where it should be sounding like? Okay, if it's sound exactly the same, okay, you tick it. But then you need to look, does it look the same? Okay, if it doesn't look the same, then you need to think, well, can they be recognized? So for example, here, maison, if there isn't an S, I say maison, yeah, sound. Does it look the same? Yeah, okay, well, just about the S, but I can still recognize it. Now, if there was a double S there, I would say maison, okay? Now, maison, okay, if I say it, it doesn't sound like maison, so therefore it will be wrong. Even though you can recognize it, you say, oh yeah, I know what they mean there. They want to say house, but actually the first test of sound is not has not been passed, so therefore you can't give them the word, okay, the mark. Okay, so the first test is sound, because this activity is about sound. The same with the je veux there. So je veux, if they put a T, if I read it, je veux is the same as je veux with an X, okay? But if they put, I don't know, L at the end, it would be je veux, and je veux, obviously, is not correct because it's not the same sound. Or if they put O, je vous, so let's say they put V-O-U-X, je vous, so the vous is not veux, so therefore you can't, so you don't go even further than that. So the first test is, does it sound where it should sound like? And then second is that, can you recognize it? Okay, so hopefully that should help you. And then what we do, then you just tick the words, and then at foundation, if they have 19 to 20, it gives them a 10. So you can see on the right hand side how you're going to award the marks. Okay, so we've tried to be compassionate as much as we could, but obviously there is a limit to the spelling, whether we can recognize it or not. So in the specification, there are more exemplifications of it. There will be more exemplifications and exemplars coming out very soon. So watch out on the website. There will be more things that we've done with students to help you with that. Okay, so what I'm going to ask you to do now, in your booklets, I'd like you to look at the foundation dictation for your language. And as we did for the read aloud, I'd like you to think of which sounds you think the student will find challenging. So these are the ones there. So the words in brackets are the words are given. Okay, so for example, if you look at the German one there, meine was given. So they had to write Schwester, ist is given. And the red are the words are not in the vocab list. Okay, so here, if you look at Spanish, for example, las was given, but they had to write that. So give you a little thing. So these are the ones we're going to look at. Which one do you think students will spell, will find quite tricky to write according to what they hear? Okay, just give you, again, you could share your thoughts in the group chat for the French or the German. What do you think they will write? Okay, so for example, for je fais du sport, do you think they write je fais, or what version of it could they come out with? Okay, so let's have a look at so we ask some students to complete these. So let's have a look at what they did. So in your booklets, you have the exemplars. Which words or sound did the students find challenging? Where the sounds or the words, the ones you were expecting. Okay, so I'm just going to give them to you. They're here. Okay, so we've got the French one. Okay. And then so you should have, then you've got the German. And then you've got the Spanish. Okay. So here, let's have a look at this one, and let's see whether we would award a mark or not for that. So here, je fais, actually, the S is missing, but we still sound the same. So that will probably get a mark. Sport is fine. J'adore is correct. Yoga is correct. Déteste, so here, the accent is missing. So it doesn't sound like déteste, but it's like déteste. Okay, so therefore, that is the sound is not the same. Nager here grammatically is wrong because it should be er, but if I say nager, it sounds the same and I can still recognize it, and it's a grammar mistake. So here nager, yeah, is wrong grammatically, but for the purpose of this task, because we are assessing the sounds here, they have given us nager. Okay, and I know because the er is the grammar, but nager, er or e with an accent is still nager. Okay, now if you look at 4, je mange is correct, and then de is wrong because de doesn't sound like de, and fruit, even though you thought, oh, I know what they mean fruit, but actually if I say it in French, it's fruit, and fruit is not fruit. Okay, so that is wrong. And then 5, le is not le, that would be wrong. And then here you think, oh, they want to say vegetable, but again, if I read it aloud, légume is not légume, so that's wrong. Son, again here, son and son, that would be accepted because it's the same sound and there's a grammar mistake there. And then important sound exactly the same, even though I haven't got the S there, okay? And then last one, it should be je, but they wrote J, so that's wrong. Marche is correct. And here, as a teacher, we know what they mean here. Okay, we've got beaucoup, but actually, if I read it aloud with the French system, it is beaucoup. And beaucoup is not beaucoup, so it's wrong. And then avec mon, and then again, chien, we know here they mean dog, but actually, if I read it aloud, is chien, and chien is not chien. Okay, so here what we've got to do is, especially if you have been teaching a long time and we are so used to seeing this type of mistakes, we like the J for the je and the chien for the chien, the beaucoup. We're so used to them and we say, oh yeah, we know what they mean. But actually here we've got to step away from our experience and step away from what we usually say, okay, yeah, I know what you mean. Actually, here is the sound. So the first thing, just read it aloud and does it sound the same? Okay, if it doesn't, then you can't give them the mark. Okay, so here again, if I look at the German here, okay, for example, the third one is a klug or klug, okay, with the umlaut. Okay, 4 is mine or meine. Okay, so did they sound it correctly? Okay, then you've got the fair then, and then the für mich, they say für mich. So für mich is not für mich, okay? Something like that, okay? And then the Spanish, you could see here things that they've spelled differently, whether it sounds the same or not, okay? You could together the library there. And then the tambien, it doesn't sound the way it should be. Okay. Like the cinema there, it doesn't sound where it should be and it's not recognizable. Okay, so as I said to you, the first test is the ear. Okay, so does it sound the same? If it sounds the same, okay, it may be accepted, but then does it look okay? Does it look where it should look? Okay, but if it's too far from where it should be, then we cannot accept it. Okay, so hopefully it's clear in terms of detest. Would it get a mark? Yeah, detest, because if I read that in French, I would say detest. Okay, so that there. Okay, all right. Okay, so let's have a look at okay, so hopefully I've gone over the 2 new tasks, looking at things that we could do to help our students, things to what could help them to annotate, things we could help them to assess themselves with a read aloud. Does it sound the same? Does it look the same? Obviously things that, as I say, we try to be compassionate about the marking. So what we're going to do is we're going to now spend this section of the event on classroom activities. So what I'd like you to do in the group chat, just a few moments, can ask you to type in any activities that you think we could do in order to help our students with the sounds and words that we came across in the read aloud and dictation task. For example, well, we've talked about the annotation, but what about the umlaut in German? What are you going to do to help students with the umlaut? What about in Spanish with the C sound, the CI and the CE? You know, what kind of activities do you think we could give them? What about the cognates? What about the final silent consonants in French? So just give you a few moments. What do you do with your students to help them with those sounds that we've kind of identified in that? So just give you a few moments just to share your thoughts. Obviously my Spanish accent, as you can hear, is not ideal, but they wrote 10 bien, 2 words. Now, does it sound the same as where it should be, first of all? And secondly, if it does sound the same as where it should be, like tam, bien or tan bien, okay, so it sound the same, would you be able to recognize it if you saw it outside the context? If I put in front of you tan, bien, do you know they mean tan bien? Okay, that's what you need to ask yourself. Thank you. Yeah, echo, paired reading. Yeah. Spot the errors. Yeah. What I did last week with my year 10, they enjoyed it. So we had we identified a few sounds. So we're looking at the E sound because we are revising the present tense. So we're looking at the E sound, not pronounce the E sound at the end, like je joue, je mange, you know, that kind of thing. And then we were looking at the S at the end of the words, and some final consonants. So we had them on the side, and then they had a text to read, and they had to do it in pairs. And then whenever one was making a mistake, the other one said, no, okay, start again. So they had to start again. So every time they were making a mistake, their friend was saying, no, start again. They would say, non, recommence, non, recommence. So every time they would say something wrong. Obviously on the board, it was clearly indicated there should be a silent E, that they should not pronounce that. But if they say je jouais, they would say, no, start again. So they start again until they get it correct. So they kind of enjoyed that. We did that for about, let's say 5 minutes, but they really liked the fact that they could say to their partners, no, start again. And, you know, and obviously the one had to start again. They were frustrated, so they were making sure that they would not say it again. Okay, thank you. Okay, good. So you've got some good examples there as well. Yeah, to race the thing there. Okay, good. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to go over some activities that, you know, some of you may be already using, some of you may have thought of it, but maybe not use, or maybe some of you used to do that a long time ago, because, you know, yes, we call it phonics, but actually it's pronunciation, and I'm sure quite a lot of us have used pronunciation tips throughout our teaching. So for example, what we could do, we could use a visual support. So we said earlier, you know, what can you do to help students for particular sounds? For example, in French, for the nasal sound, we could maybe have the number un, as the reference, and every time you say un, they know it's the sound un, like 15, copain, intéressant. Okay, so every time you show un, they know which sound. So you're just trying to refer a sound to a visual. So therefore, you know, when you are practicing with them, you just either show them the number 1 or show them number 1, and then they just say that. Or it could be with the nose. I know I touch my nose quite a lot when I say to them, careful, you know, with the nose, and they say, okay, and so on. So they know that. So just something that you agree with your class, and you say to them, okay, when I point at my nose, you know it's the sound. So make sure you keep the sound up in your nose. Okay, I don't want to hear the m or the n. Okay, something. So any visual support there to help students. Again, for the Spanish, okay, you could do the th instead of the s, is a s for the snake, okay, or you could put a th, whatever you want. So here you've got, so then you give them some words and you practice, and every time you get a snake there, they know it's a s sound, okay, for that. Okay, so here we go. Okay, then we have well, some of you mentioned earlier agreeing on transcriptions. For example, the I and the Y's in French is E, like as in B. So they can say I, fi, oui, fi, pirate, cycliste, bicyclette. So every time they know, so either we give them some visuals, so they remember the visuals. So here you could even put a B. Okay, so if you don't want the E like this, you just show them a B. So therefore they know how to pronounce the bee, because it's a bee in English. So put the insect, the bee there. Okay, so we've already looked at that. So another activity, so obviously we've introduced them, we showed them, we've got visuals, we've got transcription, we've got symbols, so we use different ways of introducing the sound. And then we're going to start doing to recognize the key sound. So here is an example of what we could do. So for example, here in German, I want to see whether they can recognize a particular sound. Okay, so I want them to recognize the sound as in eins, so the I sound. Okay, so what we could do, okay, we could say, okay, so I'm going to say 3 words, okay, and then I'd like you to tick whether they sound the same as ein. Okay, so I'm going to say mine, so eins and mine, yeah, the sounds are tick. And then I'm going to say vier. So vier, oh no, it's not, because it's not, it's the I, so I'm going to tick. I can't remember what the last one was. It was bly, so bly. So I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to say 3 words, and I like you to tick if they sound the same as eins. So mine, so will they tick the same? Okay, vier and bly. Okay, so you could do that orally, or you could give them something like this, and then you show them the words. You say, okay, here I'm going to give you words. Which ones are going to sound the same? Okay, so here they could take what eins, sound the same as mine, sound the same as bly, but not vier. Okay, if you look at number 2, okay, which one are going to sound? Number 3, okay, Fuß, Fuß, Mus, Musik. Okay, Füße is not going to be the same because we've got the umlaut. Okay, something like this. So here, something for them. So either it could be an oral, like a listening activity where we just say some words and they tick if they sound the same, or we give them words like this and they just tick the ones that sound the same, or they tick the ones that do not sound the same. So here, number 1, vier would be the odd one out. So we could do like the odd one out. If you had 1 out, for example, 3 could work out as an odd one out, because Füße would be the odd one out. Okay, just something here just to bear in mind. So different activities could be done differently. So it could be as a listening, or it could be as a reading, looking at the sounds where they sound the same. Okay, so here obviously you've got the answers there. Okay, here we could play a game of the mystery word. Okay, so here we say let's practice 2 sounds. Okay, the quoi and the que. Okay, and then what we need to do is, so you give them a list of words like this. So cuando, cuanto, sorry, apologies for my Spanish accent. And then what the students do, they choose 1 word. So let's say I've decided to choose cuenta. Okay, so that's my mystery word. So my partner will start, we say cuando, and I said no. Okay, cuantas, no. Cual, no. Cuenta, sí. Okay, so therefore they found my mystery word. Okay, and then vice versa. So basically you choose a word from the list and your partner has to say any words. They don't have to do it in order. So let's say my my mystery word could be qual. They could start with escuela, no. Okay, cuando, no. Cuenta, no. Okay, until they get to the word that I've chosen. So either they're doing the list or random. But that is good because the person who is trying to find out the word is repeating the same sound. Okay. And then obviously they're taking in terms. We could do that as a class, as a teacher, I could choose one and then they just ask me. Okay, so that's good to practice choral. You could do that choral repetition or they do it in pairs, but that is good as a start activity. Doesn't take long, but again, something that we could do for pronunciation there. Okay. As we mentioned earlier, we could ask them to recognize and then to decode and mark up. So, we could give them a list of words and say, oh, now, before you say them, I would like you to decode and mark up those words. So here we would agree on nasal sound in a particular color. So they could highlight the nasal sounds or they could underline the word the letters they're not going to say. Okay, so here, and then once they've done that, then it's okay, now you've decoded, now you've marked it up, now let's pronounce it properly. Okay, so we know we're not going to say mes, we're going to say me. We're not going to say parents, we're going to say parents. Okay, so something like, so the r, they could put something under like the r, and the r, they could put like r in front of it. So again here, that is a good kind of starter activity. They come in, they've got some words and they've got to decode them. So they could just, or as homework. That is good for homework. And then the next lesson, say, well, okay, now for homework, you've thought about those words. Let's see if we can pronounce them properly. Okay, so that is good because as they are decoding them, they're really thinking of the sounds. Okay, that's something here to bear in mind as well. Okay, so what I asked you to do, so we've seen 3 activities here. Okay, so if you think of the most challenging sounds in your language, okay, how would you adapt? What would you do with the 3 tasks that I've just given you? So we've got this one here, the markup. We've got the list here. So which sounds would you have? And then you've got a list there. So would you do listening? Would you do reading? Would you do the odd one out? So, feel free to type in the group chat where you would do these activities, or if you are with your colleagues there, you could have a chat. So I give you a few moments, or just write down for yourself, oh, maybe tomorrow with my, year 10, I'd like to do that. Or, maybe at the moment I'm working on those sounds, so maybe I could use this activity, or I might do this one next week. Okay, so just have a little thing, give you a few moments to think about those 3 activities. So recognizing key sounds, you've got the mystery word, or you have the decoding and markup. Or say, oh yeah, next lesson I'd like to do a starter activity where I'm going to ask them to decode the present and the past, or the umlaut, or whatever. Okay, so I'll give you a few moments. And then if you've got any ideas, that would be great to share in the group chat. So I'll give you a few moments. Thank you. Yeah, they're good. Yeah, the fee and the fil and the grille. Yeah, which one are you going to pronounce the same? The y sound in French. Yeah, gap fill, the sound. Yeah, you can have words and you can fill in the gaps with the sound that are missing. Okay, thank you. If you're still typing in, that's great. Okay, I just need to move on. If you're still discussing something, maybe you could carry on after this training, or maybe at another meeting, but see how, using the same activity, we could then create other activities. But remember, not always trying to create new activities, but using what we've got to make different activities. Okay, so what we could do here, for example, if we know that particular sound that always get the students nervous, or they're not sure how to pronounce them, then we could just highlight those ones and just really focus on those particular sounds. For example, here in German, looking at the particular letters that are going to be different from English. Okay, so here, we could say to them, well, in German, most consonants are pronounced the same, but there are some that are going to be different. So again, depending on where we're up in the curriculum, we might just focus on the first line or the second line, whatever sounds you have, but then you have to pronounce those letters. So just reinforce, careful, okay, most consonants are the same, but these are going to be different. So these are the ones you really need to focus on. So, I mean, you could call them a particular a group of words. So you could say, for example, the German sounds of the English sound, or you could say whatever you call them. For example, with some classes, you could say, oh, these are the naughty words because they don't follow the rules. For example, in French, the numbers, sometimes I refer the numbers 5 to 10 as the naughty numbers because they don't follow the rules, because we pronounce the ending. Because if I say 1, 2, 3, I'm okay, but when I go to 5, 6, and 7, and 8, I do pronounce the ending. So I refer to the naughty numbers. And then whenever I say careful, that's the naughty numbers. Okay, oh, why? Okay, because we pronounce the ending. So therefore they understand that. So just whatever you call them, but have a common language with your students, and just to remember. And also, for example, for number 4, when I do 4, I draw a little cat in my 4. So therefore I say, remember my little cat there, so they know they don't say quoi, because as I said, in my school, because we do Italian, they're very tempted to say quoi for quatre. So I say, careful, I've got my little cat there. So they remember that for number 4 is cat. Okay, so something like this. So just something that works with you, but every time they know you're referring to that particular group of words or particular sound, something like this. Okay, so here, then they've got to, practice these new sounds with their teacher or their partner. So then I would say, okay, how do you say number 5? How do you say number 9? How do you say number 10? And then you could just practice the particular sounds there. Okay, or you could give them that grid and you say a sound, they've got to tick it. So if I say st, okay, or st, or sp, or sh, or ch, or t, okay, then they've got to tick which one I'm saying. Okay, so that's something, introducing new sounds. So they could do as a class or individual practice. We could ask them to beat the teacher, so the class only repeat if the sound is correct. So for example, for 9, if I show 9 and I do the, okay, obviously not going to say it because that's the English the, but obviously in French, in German is t, okay, and so on. Okay, so something here to bear in mind. And then we could say to them, okay, can you find, okay, so let's say you focused on a particular topic, and then you just want to reinforce those letters and sounds, and say, okay, here is our grid, remember those sounds. Now in what we've seen today, could you give me a word that is going to exemplify number 7? So you can say, oh, Stunde, okay, for something like, or Sport. Okay, so let's say you've done hobbies. Okay, can you give me a word for that? Okay, so something here, as I said, just try to link it. So it could, as I say, it doesn't take long, but once you've covered some new vocab, say, no, quickly, here is a sound, give me a word from the list of vocab we've seen today. Which one would sound the same as ST for S for 7? Okay, so Stunde. What about 8? Oh, Sport. What about 4? Junge. Okay, something like this. Okay, something just to bear in mind. Now, other things we could do is to try to eliminate, and some of you mentioned that earlier, is cognates. And cognates are going to be the ones that are probably going to be tricky because it will see them and they will be very, very tempted to say it in English. Okay, so we've got to make sure whenever there's a cognate, some of you said or asked them to highlight all the cognates. So it's something they've got to stop and think, okay, I've got a cognate, it looks like English, but it must not sound like English. So here what we could do is we could give them words like this, okay? And then we ask them to try to say them. And then either we say them or maybe we have a recording and they've got to tick whether they kind of pronounce them the same way.
Come. Sale. Chocolate. Radio. Y.
Okay. So here they could, or, so, you know, they try and then they listen and say, oh no, I didn't say, why did I not say the same? For example, here, number 1, you know, because as my Spanish is very basic, as you could hear, maybe I may say come, okay? But here, if I listen to it, then I would have heard that it's not come.
Come.
But it's come, okay, because oh yeah, they pronounced the e at the end. Okay, so therefore sail, I would say number 2 is not going to be sail, but probably it's going to be sale.
Come. Sale.
Okay, something like this. Okay, so here just for them to realize, instead of us always telling them, they've got to, we can just play them, say, what do you notice about the pronunciation of these cognates? For example, the E sound like a E, okay? Number 5, this doesn't sound like a hey, okay, but it sounds differently. So let them explain, because if they can explain to us, it means that they've understood. Okay. Now, obviously, remembering is something different, and whether they'll be able to, but you know, the first step is to understand what the differences are.
Come. Sale. Chocolate. Radio. Ahí.
Okay, something like this. Now, another one that is particular to German, but obviously could work with any languages. When you've got long words, usually when you see a word and you think, oh, I can't say that word, it's too long. So don't worry, you need to chunk it. Okay, so let's chunk some words. So in order to chunk, we need to realize that actually a word is made up with different syllables. So here it's a good activity here that we could say. You could say to them, okay, now here obviously there's quite a lot there. You might want to reduce that. But we could say, how would you pronounce number 17? So say ein. How do you pronounce in German number 21? B. How do you pronounce 25? G. Okay, so you just do the syllables. And then once you work the syllables like this, so now let's listen to the words I'm giving you. And then, for example, you could say, I may say to them, okay, bezahlen, okay? So bezahlen, they have to, okay, B, sa, and then len, okay? So bezahlen. Okay, so either say the words, okay, and they've got to tick the syllables I'm saying, okay? And so on. Or what they could do, once they've got the syllables, that they try to make a word, okay? Obviously a word that they've seen before. Or instead of saying them, you give them the words here. And because they've already spent some time breaking down the syllables, now you say, now, you know, you could underline the syllables that you have in there. You've done it separately. Now just put all the sounds in one word. Okay, that could work as well. So chunking. So chunking is quite good to give them the confidence. Again, it's another tool. So instead of annotating, you know, underlining, here we could chunk the words. We're going to try to find syllables that we can say, because these syllables I can say them because they're very short, like number 18. I can say roof or sal or star or whatever, and then we could put that together. Okay, so, and then as I said, either I give them these long words and they've got to say them, or I'm going to say some words and they've got to tick what they hear. So that, again, there's different ways of presenting the same activity. Okay, so in the group chat, I'd like you to, again, have a little think about those activities. So we've got number 10 here. We have the working out by listening. We have these key sounds. Do you have any other activities that you use that are very similar? Or having looked at these now, can you think of other ways you can use them? Okay, again, in the group chat, if you could just type in your thoughts on those activities. So, for example, number 10 here, what can you do with this one in your language? For example, in Spanish, how would you use this one? And in French, how would you use number 10? I'll give you a few moments to think. And if you could type in, that'd be great. Yeah, you could do a bingo, sound bingo. So I'm going to say, and then just tick the sounds that you hear. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, misconception. Yeah. Yeah, you could climb the wall. Yeah. It's making certain words, make it even trickier as you go up. Okay, thank you. If you're still typing it, that's fine. We can still see your comments there. Okay, so here we've looked at some discrete activities because they're standalone, but let's have a think about how we could use phonics activities linked to the 4 key skills. So looking at listening, reading, speaking, and writing. Again, just to make sure we try to incorporate the phonics in our teaching. So for example, in speaking, we could, we try to get target language as often as possible. So here we could teach them some key phrases in the target language to explain to us why a particular word is pronounced a particular way. So here we could say, on dit, okay, and then mes parents, parce que, en français, on prononce or, ok. Et en français, on ne prononce pas les consonnes finales, ok. Ou en français, on ne prononce pas T or S, something like that. So here, you just have to just remember on dit ou on prononce, and then mes parents, car, parce qu'en français, or we could say like number 3, on dit quand, car in French, en français, on prononce quoi, que. Okay, something like this. Et on ne prononce pas de. Okay, so they explain. Okay, so in the target language. So obviously it might take a little while to start with, but once we get when they get used to it, it's easy. So if we say to them, oh, can you explain to me why this word is pronounced that way? And then they could say parce que en français, or because in German or in Spanish we don't say this, or we say that. Okay, so just key phrases there for them. Listening. So what we could do is we could ask students before the listening task to practice. It could be in class or at home, it could be homework, and maybe saying some keywords or key sound that they're going to find useful for the listening comprehension. So let's say in the listening, there were a lot of numbers. So I may say to my students, okay, now listen to numbers, repeat, practice your numbers, because in the listening, you are going to listen to, there are going to be numbers, so you need to be able to recognize them. Or practice that particular sound, because in the listening, there are going to be a lot of words with that sound, so we need to be able to recognize it. So that is going to be like a pre-listening, so that will help them then understand some keywords. For example, in French, we may say to them, okay, practice those verbs in the past or present tense, including the liaison. For example, if I have I eat, it's going to be je mange, but I ate is j'ai mangé. So they need to know the difference. So therefore, if they hear je mange, they know it's the present. Or j'ai mangé, they know it's the past. So here's something that's going to help them. So that first of all is going to help them with their listening, but also what we do here, we are reinforcing the phonics. In German, it could be the difference between plural and singular, or the different cases and something. So that would then make a difference. Or in Spanish, it could be the tenses as well. It could be whether it's a plural or whether it's masculine or is it feminine. Before using the file, okay, to answer the questions, we could ask the students to listen out for particular sounds or patterns. Okay, so we say to them, okay, I'm not going to give you the questions yet. What I'd like you to do, I'd like you to listen to the track. And what I want you to do, I want you to listen or tick every time you hear, okay, whatever, a cognate, what you think is a cognate, okay? Or whenever you hear those words, or whenever you hear that sound. Okay, so therefore what we're doing, we're trying to tune in the ears into the pattern of the language. And then after that, so we give them, but here again is a stepping stone to probably the activity, because it's going to help them answer the questions. But what we're also doing, we're also helping them with phonics. Okay, we could also give them the transcript. Okay, and then so we give them the transcript and say, now listen, which word did you not hear the first time around and why? Oh, I didn't recognize that because of this or because of that. And then they explain to us why they didn't see it. Okay, and so, oh yeah, here I thought there was that word, but actually it's not because I didn't realize that word, that sound or whatever. So they've got to reflect on how important it is to understand the rules of phonics. And as I said, they could then practice identify. So once they've got a transcript, then you can use that as a read aloud. You say to them, okay, now we've done the listening. Here is a transcript. Now let's do the read aloud with that. Let's look at the key sounds in there. Okay, and then you could do the annotation, and then you do the read aloud. So we don't always have to make our own read aloud. Why not use the transcript? Because the transcript of your listening will be using, if you're using a textbook, for instance, they'll be using the vocab from the vocab list. So it's already made. So you've got read aloud. It may not be exactly what the read aloud would be like, but it will be within the same kind of level and language. But now with reading, okay, just giving you a few moments here to read through. Okay, and then I'm going to explain. Okay, so again here, if we do a reading task, so why not use it as a read aloud as well? And one way of identifying some key sounds. So let's try to do a few things with the same task instead of trying to create more things all the time. Okay, so once we've done the reading task, okay, now let's say, imagine you had that text to read. What would you say? How would you annotate that? Okay, and to chunk. Okay, for example, here we could ask them to chunk it, because if you chunk it properly, you're going to say it properly and then make sense. So like, mes amis qui s'appellent ont 13 ans. And then we could ask them to, annotate whatever. So again, try to think about what we do already, and then try to just maybe add another 5 minutes to reinforce phonics. So instead of just doing reading and then we go to something else, let's do reading and then ask ourselves, okay, I've got a reading text there. How can I use it for phonics? Okay, so here are different ways that we can do so. Okay, homework, I mentioned it earlier. Okay, so I'll just give you something here. Oops, sorry. Okay, some homework tasks. I've already mentioned some during the session, but I'll just give you a few moments to read. Now, depending on your how equipped that you are or your students are, they could be recording themselves, they could be sending that to you, it could just be a list of words, or you record yourself saying a few words and they've got to write them out, or you give them a list of words and you record yourself saying some words and they've got to tick the ones you've said. So here, you could see with that they can't really, because with some of homework, we just worry that they may use Google Translate or whatever. But here, they have to use their knowledge, because if you ask them to annotate, they can't really ask Google to annotate. If you say some words, they can't really ask Google to select from the list you give them. So here is kind of, they have to do the work, they have to think about it. Okay, and the flip learning, some of you, if you are using flip learning, that could be a good way. So if you know you're going to do a listening, you could give them some work to practice. If you know you're going to do some or like a read aloud, you could give them some key words to practice. So basically the homework is going to feed into the lesson instead of being a follow-up to the lesson you've just done. The homework is going to help and feed into the next lesson. Okay, just here again, if you've got a few moments, be nice to just give an example or more if you want to, or of how you have integrated phonics into listening, reading, or homework activities. I'll give you a few moments there just to type in, just to share with everyone how you've integrated. Have you been given phonics for homework, or have you used listening task with phonics or reading? So anything that you could share with everyone, that'd be great. Thank you. Okay, the new GCSE list is in the specification. So if you look at the spec, and also on our website, there is a document. So if you go to new GCSE, and if you go into vocab list, then you will find it there. Yeah, highlight tricky words, key sounds. Yeah. Yeah, good. So again, here's trying to maximize what we do, so what we've created. So just said, let's see if we could just put a little bit of phonics in there. Yep. Thank you, Pascaline. Thank you. Okay, thanks for that. Thank you for sharing. If you're still typing in, that's fine. Okay, everyone can see that. Okay, that's great. Okay. All right, so just to finish off, okay, I'd like to just go over some support that we are providing. So if you need any, there are some key sounds videos. So if you go on our website, the 2026 GCSE, if you go to course materials, then if you go for key sound, you've got some posters and you've got some schemes of work as well. So you could see there how you've brought from sea sand. So why don't you just to finish off, I'd like to get some just feedback from you. So what are you taking away from today's event? Do you have a favorite activity or strategy? And what do you think might be a challenge when focusing on phonics? So just any thoughts from today's event, or are you going to share with your department, or are you going to try particular activities, or you like that particular strategy? That'd be great if you could share with everyone how this event is going to impact on your teaching. That'd be great. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your thoughts there. Okay, great. Okay, thank you very much for all your ideas there and comments. So remember, in order to support your teaching, we've got a subject advisor. So any questions you may have, your first port of call is our subject advisor, Rebecca. So make sure that you contact her if you've got any questions. Remember, as you've done for this course, any other courses that we have is in the academy, so keep having a look at it, because we keep putting new courses there. And if you would need one of us to come into your center, remember you can request a visit or a phone call, so please do that, because we'll be happy to come and see you. Some of you may have already been contacted by one of us, so all of you should have had contact with us, our subject specialist, and some of you may have had a discussion with your subject specialist for your area. So please make use of the support available that we offer. So it'd be great to have your feedback from today's training. So please let us know. You will get an email, and that will be great to hear your thoughts on today's event. So on behalf of Pearson, I'd like to thank you for attending this evening and listening to me for the last hour and a half, more than that now. So thank you, and I hope that has been useful, and you're going to be able to apply that knowledge into your lessons. So on behalf of Pearson, thank you, and thank you for sharing your thoughts as well. It was very good to hear comments from everyone. So thank you, everyone. Have a lovely evening, and hopefully I will speak to you or see you very soon. Okay, thank you very much, and thank you, Antoinette, for your support this evening. Okay, thank you. Have a good evening, everyone, and good luck.